Hi, I'm Shoshi Goldstein-Nissenbaum, a Tolenet Rabbanit, a halachic advocate, and a mediator. Welcome to my podcast, Divorcing with Dignity. Today, I am honored to host Yonasan Bender, who's a psychotherapist who graduated from not only from Yale University, but from Hebrew University, has training in a lot of modalities, CBT, the Beck Institute, in addition to, I think, the more famous of all of them, including Yale University, for those of us in the realm of working on marriages or divorce, and that is the Gottman Institute. He specializes in treating anxiety, depression, anger, poor self-esteem, insomnia, autism, eating disorders, psychosis, problems in parenting, sexual dysfunction, and marital conflict. He has an extensive background working with individuals, couples, families, and children in his therapy practice in Jerusalem. So welcome, very happy that you gave us from your precious time. That's a long list of specialties.
Took a
That's
while.
impressive.
Took a while to do. Well, I mean, it's a partly I'm a nerd and I get obsessive, and when I want to learn something, I learn something. So,
Okay, great. Great. So we're going to really be happy to tap into your knowledge. So today's topic is when to throw the towel in.
yeah,
And the reason why I brought up this topic is because a lot of time a client or potential client will turn to me, make an appointment, and then they'll ask me, do you think I should get divorced? Right? Now, I
right,
think everyone should get divorced and they should use me as their Towan and Rabbanit, right? So, chas v'shalom, I don't think that.
right,
I've
right.
had many clients who I've told them, listen, really, you can work this out. I think you can work this out. I think you can try. I
Yeah.
can't predict necessarily if someone can work it, but I think there's who to work with on the other side or things that they can do. Um,
Well, I mean, it's a big question. I mean, like, it's kind of
it's a
putting
big
you on the
question,
spot for, in
right?
some
So
sense,
I'm not a therapist and
yeah,
I'm not a rabbi, which you are, right? That's the one thing I forgot to mention. Rabbi Bender has smicha from Rabbi Berkowitz from Yerushalayim. So I always look at it as someone comes to me and they order pizza, I deliver pizza. They order sushi, I give them sushi. Like I can't tell them get divorced, not get divorced.
yeah,
So there isn't in the legal concept, there's something called moed hakera, which would be an analogy would be like time of death, right? When did the marriage die?
right, right.
So we don't write that on the Tudat Girushin. It's not on the certificate of divorce, but it is a legal concept and it has a lot of legal ramifications. When did the marriage die? So my big question to you is, how do you know from a therapeutic aspect, and not from a halachic aspect, because that's a different question, but from a therapeutic aspect, when would we put down the time of death of a marriage?
Yeah, that is a big, and it's worth. I mean, to be honest with you, it's worth answering both questions from a therapeutic perspective, but also from a ruchnistic perspective. I mean, to separate the two is separating the neshama from the body in many respects. So it's the real emotion from brass tacks. The there's a lot of different types of divorces and what causes people to get divorced. So there's kind of like two broad categories. There's a situation where the couple is, fighting like cats and dogs. There's like a tremendous amount of criticism. Everyone's defensive. Everybody's keeping tally with who did what, when, why, and how. And that's one version where just from a bitter attrition, people are worn down until they say, listen, I invested so much, I'm in so much pain, I just can't do it anymore. And it generally it takes about, the key markers are, after year 3 and year 10. That's one version. The second version is, and this really baffled marital therapists for a long time, that you'd have these couples who they're not fighting. There's no criticism. If you were to ask them, do you respect your spouse? They'd say, sure do. And then you'd ask the next question, well, how often do you spend time with them? And they'd say, not often. That it was almost as though these two people were less than roommates, developing separate lives, maybe they're sharing children, but not much else. And they slowly grow apart because over time people individuate. They become different people. So much so that it's unrecognizable, their partner from when they got married. So these were two different versions of, well, when does a marriage end? Very different time frames. When the pain is just too great, or they can't recognize the person they're living with.
So at that point, you would say it's time to, as a therapist, it's time to explore other options.
At that stage, it's time to get into therapy, and really, that's the wait time for people going into therapy. The average is usually 10 years. Like people are suffering for a decade on
I mean,
average.
people will suffer for 10 years in silence, right? Until they say, okay, we need to go to therapy.
Yeah, 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 they absolutely will. They absolutely will. I mean, the 3 year mark I mentioned, that's usually, people, that's usually people who are more personality-wise more disagreeable, and they're not going to, tolerate being talked to the way they are, and they're not going to tolerate their lives being this way, and so they'll just cut it, without necessarily going to therapy. But that is the average. That's the average wait time. So they're suffering in silence, the silence in public, but oh man, in private, they're yelling and fighting and screaming.
That really, it's interesting because there's a lot of talk in all the magazines, all the Jewish magazines, Orthodox magazines, about the shidduch crisis. You cannot open a magazine and not see something about a shidduch crisis. And every time I see it, I like cringe. I'm like,
Hmm.
shidduch crisis? Or the divorce crisis, right? I'm
Yeah.
like, there's no shidduch crisis, there's no divorce crisis. There is a midos crisis. There is a lack of people who are really interested in working on themselves and looking in the mirror and hearing the truth and making choices. On the one hand, in from society, seeking therapy used to be very taboo. Today it's not
Yeah.
taboo, right? It's very, like, it's like, who's your therapist, right? Which therapist have you tried? Okay. I don't
Right.
think people expect people to go through life and all the different stages of life without ever having some kind of therapeutic encounter in their lives. And I think that's great, because
Yeah.
I think that is the answer. The answer is to really look in the mirror and try to figure out who I am and where to go forward. And that reflects also that most of the divorces that at least I do are long-term marriages. I don't
Okay.
have a lot of young kids, young kids, I'm talking about in their lower 20s, who've been married for a couple months, who've been married. Those are severe, and those get, taken care of.
Yeah, that's
Is
usually, something
I see
dramatic.
people who are in marriages for long term, who have, a lot of kids, who've been there not just for 10 years, but who've been in a marriage for 20 years. I had a number of divorces over the past year where the couple was married over 35
Yeah.
years.
When
I
the
think I
kids
had
get when
three
the
or
kids get
four.
married, that's when they're getting divorced. Yeah.
They waited it out,
Yeah,
or
they
one of
waited it
them
out.
waited
They
it out.
waited it out. Yes.
um,
And
and
it's
interestingly enough,
usually
in
the
all of
wife,
those, what?
husbands, and it's usually the wife who's waiting out. Usually husbands don't realize there's a problem, which kind of gets into in certain ways certain causes. Like, well, why didn't they realize there was a problem? Well, one half of the marriage didn't realize there was a problem. Legitimately, didn't realize there was a problem.
That
Oftentimes.
we have all the time in Beit Hadin. When one of the couple, either the husband or the wife, decides they want to get a divorce, the other one is like,
What
what?
happened?
I'm married. We have a perfect, and then they, kick in their heels, and that's where Sarvanut Laget comes up, where and that's always the most amazing thing, where you have one
Yeah.
person coming in with a narrative about abuse, about, all these hurtful things, and the other party is like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Where did
Like,
this come from?
everything is fine. Like, what could that possibly be? So we have the crisis that we have is not a crisis of, shidduchim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he takes care of everybody in
Yeah.
shidduchim. We just had Parshas B'Shalach, where Chazal tell us, kasha zivugo shel adam kekriyas yamsuf. A person's zivug is as hard as kriyas yamsuf, and we all have to ask the question, well, what is kasha? What is hard for Hashem? what could possibly be hard for Hashem? Everything is easy for Hashem. And an answer I heard is that we make it difficult. We make it very difficult. So because we make it difficult, it's excuse me, just having we have an azakah here up north.
Oh,
Sorry about
okay.
that.
Do you want to you want to go to your safe room?
No,
Call it
I'm
a.
good. I'm good.
You're good. Okay.
I'm in a safe place.
Oh,
Baruch
fine.
Hashem.
Okay. Okay.
So
Well, there's a lot of interesting psychological research on this point you're kind of bringing up, and it's not so much in the Haredi community, not so much in the religious community, although like researchers are kind of slowly going into that that realm, but um, it seems like there's like a mixture of, I mean, Revolve already is writing about this in Ellie Shore. I mean, the emotional fortitude for people to withstand criticism is much less, and that definitely bears out in research that it's the fun technical term is fragilization, that especially since the 2000s there's been a radical increase in just how people are psychologically much more fragile. And there's a bunch of reasons for it, but I mean the very much is front and center in terms of, well, why are people unable to withstand a very difficult matzav, a very difficult situation, marriage, living with somebody who does not see the world the way you do. I mean if anything, it's incredibly difficult. Because in most contexts, if it's a friend, well, you don't have to see a friend every day. Friendship, technically speaking, is someone you see every now and again. You can stop talking to the guy for 10 years and then immediately pick it right back up. There isn't that same, it's not even a question of investment, but this molding effect. With family members, I mean, since you were born, you're able to ignore just how weird your family members are. Y'all just kind of don't see the same things, and yes, see the same things, like you are going to be mostly like your mom and dad after all. But with a spouse, it just isn't that way. It's an incredibly difficult thing to live with somebody who is fundamentally not like you in most ways. And the fact that, whether because of parenting, parents
or
in.
whether you grew apart or whether you just one of the spouses changed.
Yeah, and it's to attack being able to withstand those challenges, really starts with parenting. The parenting styles that people have developed over time. Parents go out of their way to protect their kids in every way possible, and in a sense, well, you have to protect your kids. That's a good idea. But ever since the 90s, there's a lot of cultural reasons why. There was a lot of high profile kidnappings, even though kidnapping is crazy rare. More people die falling out of bed than being kidnapped by a stranger. Usually most kidnappings, it's a parent dispute and one parent takes their kid, but it's genuinely rare for kidnappings to occur. But parents are just completely frightened by this, and since the 90s, um, all the ways in which kids could actually explore the world and be on their own, and learn that they can withstand the knocks of life, were taken away from them from well-intentioned parents who are scared to death that anything bad could happen to their kids. And so that, just one example, just one reason of many that translates into later in life, kids not emotionally growing up, being too fragile to withstand something as beautiful but as difficult as marriage.
That's really very interesting, because what you're saying is that besides that, really it's very hard to educate somebody for marriage before they're married, but they need certain fundamental skills in order to make a marriage work.
Yeah,
They need to be marriage material,
they need to be
which
marriage
is,
material.
when I used to teach, and I used to take my students to Kivrei Tzadikim. So every time we go to a muka, I would tell them, don't just daven for zivug hagun, daven that you should be hagun la zivug, that you should be ready to accept your spouse and be married.
Yeah,
Um, because it's not easy to have
no,
a
it's not easy.
real good marriage. Forget about
No.
a okay marriage, right? To have a good pulsating live marriage is something which requires a lot of work. And
Yes.
it's not like happily ever after and then, they ride off into the sunset. So um another topic and a tool that I found which has helped a lot of couples in a last ditch effort to save their marriage is a post-nup agreement, which
Hmm.
in Israel is called Heskem Shalom Bayit L'Chilufin Girushin, which is controversial. I actually suggested it recently to two different couples who came to me to mediate their divorce. I said maybe, they were like, yeah, we want to get divorced, but like they weren't 100%
They're on the
sure,
fence.
and what right, and one of
Yeah.
them in each one, the husband was very sure he wanted to get divorced, the other
Hmm.
one, the second couple, the wife was very sure she wanted to get divorced, and the other one was like I guess, like, do we have like, and I said, you do have another choice. Why don't we bring in your therapist, make a very clear list of real tangible goals that you will have for the next 6 months or a year. You both go to therapy,
Yeah.
private therapy. You will meet once a week in a therapy. You'll have date night, once a week. You're going to go through a walk once a week. Um, One of them, there was a problem of one of the spouses waking up the other one in the middle of the night, right?
Yeah.
We're not going to do that anymore. Like, very specific things, because you can't like write, I'm going to be a nice person, I'm going to be respectful. That doesn't mean
Too
anything. Certainly
vague.
not
Yeah.
legal.
Yeah.
Um, and
I'm gonna hope for
I
the
think
best.
I've done this with a number of couples, some with success, some
Yeah.
ended up staying married. Some ended up staying and actually began being happily married, because once they knew what was going to be if they got divorced,
Hmm.
they stopped stealing money from each other, and they stopped trying to, like you had mentioned earlier, create this file of everything which is wrong
Hmm.
with their spouse, and actually started working on themselves, working on their marriage with no fear of the future. So I had these two couples, and both of them went to their one went to the Rav, one went to the Admor to ask if they should do this, and both couples, excuse me, came back and they said to me, well, their rabbi said that there's no such thing and it's not a good thing and they shouldn't do it. And I was like, can I talk to them? Can I
Yeah.
explain to them what it
Yeah.
means? Like, the next step is divorce. So, a post-nup is not, halachically, it's very, very, the Beis Din loves it when couples do it.
Sure.
Um, and they go before the Beis Din. And I actually did it for, I don't want to say the Hasidic sect, because I don't want to open up that can of worms, but a number of years ago, I did a Heskem Shalom Bayit, the Chilufin Girushin, for a very, very Hasidic couple who
Hmm.
follow, in their Hasidus, they follow their Admor, whatever he says, they don't do anything without asking. And we came to the Beit Hadin. I think even the Dayanim were a little bit surprised,
Hmm.
but they asked them questions and they approved it. And then we were finished, and I said, wait a second, Kvod Harav, I want you to bless this couple that they never walk into this Beis Din or any other Beis Din again.
Yeah.
And he really blessed them, like, very sincerely. And Baruch Hashem, it's been a few years, I haven't heard from them, so I
Thank God.
guess things are good. But what do you think about that? Because there are
Yeah.
couples who come to me and say it's just a manipulative tactic. It's not, we're never going to really have shalom bayis. The other side is just trying to buy more time, or trying to get me in a good mood where I'll agree to things where I never would agree to that because I want to stay married. So I'll promise you a higher mizonot. What do you think about that?
Well, a limud schus for the rebellion. The, it is true there's a psychological principle that if a person imagines that they're doing something, when they really outline in their head a path towards, well, in this case, well, if things don't work out, we're getting divorced. The likelihood, it's a motivation. The likelihood that that's going to happen may very well increase under certain circumstances. That's possible. So it really gets to the heart of, well, how are you actually organizing this agreement? Because on the other side, what you're doing really is you're laying down the building blocks for how to negotiate with somebody else, which that skill is right up there with, well, maybe not today, but how to balance a checkbook and how to do your taxes. I mean, that those are things people do not learn how to do in
And this
schools,
skill,
and it's a vital skill.
and
Negotiate.
this skill, if they are going to be getting divorced, they're going to need even more,
Oh
because they're
gosh,
still
yes.
going to be co-parenting together, and they're going to be negotiating on a monthly basis, weekly basis, daily
If
basis.
they're smart, they'll be co-parenting together. I mean, just kind of briefly, I mean, that's it, if people are going to go down the road of divorce, everyone worries about their kids. What's going to happen to my kids when we get divorced? And the bottom line is that if a couple does three things, the chances of their kids coming away with mental health issues is close to zero. You have to have 50-50 custody. You have to live 10 minutes travel time from your spouse so that you're not uprooting your kid's life, that they're able to maintain their sense of their Daladamos. What is their life? You got to have those two. And don't trash talk your ex-spouse while being able to getting back to negotiation, you know, being able being able to negotiate with this human being and how to move forward. And so when putting together this agreement, well, that what is negotiation fundamentally? It's knowing exactly what you want. It's setting clear goals based on values and being willing to say, and if you don't do this important thing, there is a consequence. And that doesn't mean, your no having teeth doesn't mean that you're going to be a bully. It doesn't mean that you're, a bad person and you're hurting somebody else. What that fundamentally means is you have to have a vision of what you want your life to be, and to not allow yourself to be taken advantage of by someone else. Because, well, that's a wonderful road to walk down, because essentially if your no doesn't have teeth, you're giving all the power to the other person, with the repercussion of, and if things don't go my way, I'm just going to be bitterly resentful against you. That's not a good recipe for a marriage. So in some sense, being
Not
able
a
to
good
have,
recipe for a divorce either.
yeah, exactly, and that's certainly not a good
Yeah,
that ingredient doesn't work in any
in
recipe.
anything. Doesn't work in business either.
So right, exactly. And so not giving that sort of emotional power to another person does require, the individual to, yes, take on the level of responsibility of asserting what they want and what they don't want. And so, those two pieces are so difficult. Uh, the being able to verbalize what you want is very hard, and to expect the person you're married to do you the kindness and chesed of knowing what you want without you
Yeah.
telling them is far too much to ask for. So having those two things sorted out, it seems to be, if you're going to do it right, this marital agreement, towards, well, knowing if this doesn't pan out, there's going to be a divorce, is ticking those two boxes and what you have to do to have a good marriage.
If you have, and if you, what I find is that sometimes the process of mediation, the couple can actually realize, you know what, we can come to some kind of understanding, right? If it's done, if they're mature and they want to be really in mediation, right?
Yeah,
Not that they're not going to get divorced, because they made a decision to get divorced. But some, again, not for the Heskem Shalom Bayit, then they're still kind of, we're not sure.
yeah.
But it actually will make them better post-divorce co-parents. I want to ask you a question, because you said three things, which if parents want to make sure that the least damage, damage control from the divorce for the children. So you said 50-50 custody, the parents should live 10 minutes away from each other, and no trashing.
In the
So
system of being able to negotiate. But yeah,
right,
yeah. On
no
top of it all,
trashing, period. Solution oriented,
yeah.
right? Which is very difficult. It's very difficult to be solution oriented. And it's very easy to fall into being, start off saying we want to do this the best for the kids. We're divorcing because it's for the best, it's
Yeah.
best for the children, which is sometimes true and sometimes very not true when couples think it's true. But putting that aside, the 50-50 custody. So this is an issue that comes up again and again and again, right? You can have a father who was pachot yoter Abba shel Shabbat, right? He was working or he was in Kollel the whole week, and the kids saw him on Shabbos. The parents are now divorcing, and now he wants 50-50 custody. So if both parents agree, great. Now, if both parents don't agree, or if the one of the, and sometimes it could be, I've worked with fathers also. I'm working with a father right now. I don't want to go into detail because it's an open case where the mother is her mothering skills are extremely questionable. Okay. Extremely questionable. So, 50-50 custody is when the other side is not really capable, A. B, very often, I would say in 60 to 70% of the divorces that I deal with, one of the spouse, and sometimes it's the one I'm representing, right? It's not always the other side. One spouse has some kind of mental illness, whether it's and I'm not diagnosing, but you see when somebody is being completely unreasonable, whether it's my client or the other side, has a very, very strange narrative about things which just don't add up. You see clients, I've had clients myself, and I've seen clients who actually begin fighting their lawyer, right? Because they're very paranoid, and I've had a number of clients who insisted that I was in cahoots with their spouse's lawyer, plotting against them, right? Which, things which, of course, I mean, maybe there are lawyers who would do that, or Toanim who would do that, but I certainly, wouldn't do that. So you pick up that something's not 100%. Would you recommend, even in cases like that, 50-50 custody?
So a couple, we'll double click on that. Number one, no one, I mean, it's kind of, it's going to be a funny way I want to put it, but like no one's at their best when they're getting divorced. I mean, here's a great idea. Let's entirely rip up your life, rip up your sense of identity, completely burn the future you thought you had, and then start to question the past. Oh my gosh, who was the person I married all those many years ago, and who was I that I didn't realize how bad things are? So I mean, that's to say that someone is not at their best when they're getting divorced is an understatement. The very fabric of their being is being trashed. Number one, the level of resentment any normal person will have, like I said, 10 years average not going into therapy, that sense of resentment, of keeping track, keeping score, being so hypersensitive to all the slights, all the unfairness, well, is certainly going to look like someone who is narcissistic. It's going to certainly look like someone who's antisocial personality disorder. But every normal human being is gonna on some level look like that. I mean, I I have I have only once in my entire career met a couple who were doing just fine, and they came into couples therapy, and it was because they were so fearful and hypersensitive. They came from backgrounds where their parents had been divorced, and they had felt, so hurt by that experience that they were just so hypersensitive that they never wanted to even come, a million miles close to divorce, that they came into therapy. And I'm just sitting with them thinking, I can't help you because you guys are okay. That I like, thank God, like
Wow.
this is okay. So that's kind of number one. You're definitely not catching people at their best. But that being said, you know, certainly if a person is coming in with a clear-cut psychiatric disorder like schizophrenia, which is extreme, bipolar disorder, which is extreme, and these things are established, They are, and there's even evidence that these people, some people with bipolar disorder are absolutely able to lead a normal life. They stay on medication, they have their support group. There's no reason on God's green earth that they shouldn't have access to their kids. But something that's extreme like that, then, absolutely there has to be some question in terms of a person's ability to keep their kids safe. The That's one piece. What's interesting is that, all this research I'm citing that kids are better off with 50-50 custody. That research was dealing with a pool of individuals who were low-income families. They, definitely had one or two screws loose, for lack of a better term. Not necessarily fully employed. You would not bring these sorts of people home to meet your parents. However, still, it was far better for them to remain in their children's lives than to not.
Wow.
There's two parts to that. Number one is there's no one who's going to love your kids more than you. The That's just true. And it's it is vitally essential that your kids actually grow up with their parents showing that, because you're not going to get that anywhere else. That's one piece. Uh, the other part here is, well, what do mom and dads actually do that are different? Because mom and dads are different. And one way of thinking about it is that the type of parenting that moms give to their kids, parenting being able to raise a child who is going to be fully functional, well liked, successful in their lives. Well, what do you need? You need, generally speaking, what mothers give to develop that is a sense of fairness, is a sense developing compassion, and nurturance. Real pro-social behaviors. Volunteer, give tzedakah, and be a nice person. You absolutely need that to be successful in life. Well, dads also, mom and dads aren't like, it's not like from different planets. They're not, everyone's a human being, obviously, but dads give over something very different. Responsibility, hard work, emotional resilience mostly comes from fathers, and a sense that, getting back to this idea of being fragilized, dads have a defragilizing effect on their kids. An example, kind of, how mom and dads come together. Picture for a second, dad's out playing in the yard with their kids, and dad's tossing these kids up in the air as high as they can go. Oh my gosh, 3 stories high. That little kid, like, doesn't weigh so many pounds. You can toss that kid pretty high. Scares mom half to death. Oh my
That's
gosh,
right.
what are you doing?
And Safta.
Yeah, mom says, hey, knock it off. And so what ends up happening is, well, dad's not really going to listen to mom because, he's having a good time. And, mom's not going to put up much of a fight with dad. So what happens is compromise. Pshara. Dad stops tossing the kid up in the air as high. And what this illustrates is that both mom and dad are bringing very different things into the parenting of their kids, and they're creating a whole human being, valuing safety, fairness, compassion, nurturance, and a sense of adventure, emotional resilience, and responsibility taking, that you're tough enough to take on responsibility. So that's the second reason why that 50-50 split is so essential, that a person as an individual, you have to have some sense of humility. You can only do so much. No one's a jack of all trades, and it doesn't just take a village to raise a kid. It takes a mom and a dad.
Right here. Um, I like that example. That really illustrates the balance and the coming together. I want to go back to our topic of when to throw the towel in, and from a therapeutic sense, what happens to a person? And obviously every person is different, okay? But
Yeah.
the general trajectory. What happens to a person who decides to stay in a dead marriage, knowing that they're staying in a dead marriage and knowing that it's a dead end marriage? Um, what are the rates of survival, resilience? Because in our community, it's not so simple to get divorced. I don't
Yeah.
think anybody just says, oh, this didn't work out. I'm not trying. I'm throwing the towel in and gets divorced, because the the community doesn't accept that, right? The community doesn't accept
Right.
the general community. I mean, I know for myself, where I was teaching in a number of Israeli seminaries, and I got divorced, and all of a sudden I had no work,
Mm.
right? I had no work.
Yeah.
No one wanted a divorce teacher. I had one Israeli seminary who kept me on,
Ooh, wow.
and the American seminary that I taught
Yeah.
in. Other than that, everyone was like, goodbye. Have a
Right.
night,
Wow.
like, you know, oh, we were not opening the course next semester, like bologna and salami. They just, they didn't want.
They didn't want.
They didn't want a divorced teacher there.
Mm.
And there's a very high price to pay. Some people will look at it in terms of shidduchim, right? I can't get divorced because my children and their shidduchim. Well, by the way, I just want to say the fact that those seminaries did not rehire me
Mm.
was actually the biggest blessing that ever happened to me, because
Okay,
I got a
sure.
new career from it.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, I went and I learned to be a Tohen and Rabbanit. I said, okay, if this is not working out, then I better get myself a career. So Baruch Hashem, I'm grateful that Hashem orchestrated it that way. But that's the way it works, right? Um, the way and men as well. There's actually a halacha that a cheder rebbe cannot be divorced.
Yep.
It's in the Shulchan Aruch.
Yep.
So a man who gets divorced, who's a cheder rebbe or who's a Maggid Shir, he's facing the fact that they might actually fire him, and halachically they could do that. Doesn't mean that that's necessarily the right thing to do. I'm
Right.
not commenting on that, but
Yeah,
it's a
yeah, yeah.
possibility. So a lot of people choose to stay in dead marriages. What happens to somebody like that? What are the risks they're taking? Maybe that's a better way of analyzing it. Because
Yeah.
what happens to them, every person is different. What are the risk factors psychologically of staying in a dead marriage?
Yeah, and that's, because the way you're presenting is also, it's a very complicated question. Like, what frame of reference are you looking at? Because on the one hand, well, on the individual level, well, what happens if someone's in a extremely unhappy marriage? They die sooner. I mean, how about that? Life expectancy plummets. The rate of even something as small as how many times you get the common cold every year skyrockets, let alone other diseases. So, well, it kills you. That's what happens. Um,
Does that
on
happen to the children as well?
So what ensures children thrive is not. This is actually kind of interesting. I did some research personally on this question, and it's not so much. It seems to be that what helps kids thrive is not so much how warm and fuzzy and mushy mom and dad is. It's here's a bad way of putting it. It's not so much that mom and dad remember your birthday. It's more that you have a sense that mom and dad are the ground under which you stand, and that you feel completely like assured that life is safe and good. So obviously, if that's your mom and dad, they'll remember your birthday. But the point being is that it's less the sentimental, which must be there, but more the sense that you can rely on your mom and dad. They're tough enough, they're strong enough that you can rely on. So, if you can pull that off, fantastic. But again, getting back to, well, why are people getting divorced? They really can't negotiate. They can't say to their spouse, they can't even articulate to themselves what they want, let alone their spouse. And so it's a recipe for constant fights and chaos. So that definitely does wear on kids because, well, that's not safe. That's terrifying. That sort of level of chaos in the family. So it's wearing on kids also. So on that level, it's incredibly devastating staying in a terrible marriage like that. shifting the frame of how broad we're looking at this problem. Well, having a culture, say, in Western culture, there's this prevalent idea that, well, you should, YOLO, you only live once, and you should have the best life, and there's this sort of deep-seated, not clinical narcissism, but this sort of deep-seated narcissism, this sort of selfishness that exists in Western culture, broadly speaking. I'm not trying to cast aspersions. I mean,
Right.
this is there's plenty of atheistic philosophers who will say the same thing. Go check out John Vervaeke and his meaning crisis. Like his work on the meaning crisis. Like this is pretty standard information. So, when you have such a culture where there's no parents, where you have such dramatic levels of divorce, well, you have the same, if not worse, problems as far as the mental health issues and the self-esteem issues and the prevalence of disease and the mental health crisis that we're seeing in the Western world is very much related. Here, I'll give you an example. So this is an extreme example of shooters, mass shooters in the United States. A lot of people say, well, it's the prevalence of guns. Oh yeah, well, why doesn't Sweden and Switzerland and in Israel have the same level of mass shootings? Well, there's tons of guns in those countries.
Tons of guns everywhere.
There are tons of guns everywhere. What's going on in America? The common denominator between every mass shooter is they didn't have a dad in their life. Full
Wow.
stop. Broken homes. And Israel's doing pretty good in terms of the having the prevalence of mom and dad in their kids' lives, being very family oriented. Well, that's not good either. And so there really is this sort of tension between what we not to use the word institution because it doesn't quite capture like marriage, but the institution of marriage, it definitely keeps society together. And at the same time, if you're in such a horrible marriage, well, it's tearing your life apart. So it's, looking at, depending upon what your reference point is, it's a sticky question, but certainly being in a marriage where you're being abused and it's wearing on you in that way, definitely there has to be at some point where you throw the towel in. I mean, we're not the Catholic Church asking for the Pope to give us permission to get divorced. There is a utility in being able to say, listen, this isn't working out. We need to call it quits. So it's not exactly an easy question to answer from when you start broadening out the vision there. But
So it's really very individual.
yeah,
It's individual of how much tolerance a person has, and that I hear that. Maybe if I could ask one last question,
yeah,
right? And that is when you have couples who come to you, right? And you mentioned and we said it in your introduction that you're the Gottman Institute, right? Where you can predict that this couple is most probably going to get divorced.
yeah.
Do you share that with him?
Nope.
That information? No, no. So you wouldn't tell a couple, listen, you got I mean, I'm sure many of our listeners are familiar with this, and if they're not, they should be. But the four horsemen, right? When you see that in a marriage, what do you do? What is there, like, not every marriage is salvable.
No,
Even
that
when both parties come and say,
right.
yes, we want to stay married, but
Yeah.
it's
There was
not workable.
there was only one time that I actually felt it was necessary to tell one side, hey, this is not this ain't going well. And it was in a case where the other spouse was a full-on they had very strong psychopathic tendencies. This was a person who was more of a lizard than a human being.
This person was born what?
More of a lizard than a human
Oh,
being.
wow. Okay.
So, but that aside, I mean, we're not talking about questions of, abuse, but it is true that, I mean, when a couple's, high conflict, high contempt, defensiveness, stonewalling, I mean, those do predict divorce, and they predict it pretty accurately. I wouldn't
Even
sh
in frum society.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, so I wouldn't necessarily tell people because, well, on the one hand, that's statistically true. On the other hand, who says you have to be a statistic? And so there
Yes, yeah.
sometimes you can throw the Hail Mary and make the touchdown from, you make it 90 yard pass. Short of that, though, that does happen, but so you don't want to close the door to a possibility of creating a path forward that these two people, because they fell in love once. There is something there that they at some point did see the other person as the one that they wanted to share their life with. There was a spark, there was a sense of meaning, there was something grabbed both the husband and wife to say, hey, you know what, like I want to share the rest of my life with you. And so a part of couples counseling is really trying to find out, can that spark, that neshama, be unearthed? That being said, though, and I could kind of getting back to one of your previous questions in terms of the shalom bias agreement, that a lot of those things in that is really, I mean, therapeutic. If a therapist is not doing those things, they're not doing their job. There has to be a certain level of setting those standards, outlining what the goals are, making clear what both parties want, and that is I think it's much more pronounced in Gottman's approach to therapy. Also, behavioral couple therapies are really good at doing that. But that's so I hope that answers the question. That it's you
Yeah,
you
I
you don't
think
you don't
so.
you don't want to you don't want to like you want to give it a go. That's the bottom line. You want to give it a last
Want to give it
go.
a fair chance
Yeah,
without, labeling the marriage that, oh, this is doomed.
yeah, yeah.
Right. But do you think the Heskem Shalom Bayit Lechilufin Girushin labels the marriage as doomed, or it actually gives them a space to work?
As long as the spirit of its creation is for the sake of finding solutions, yeah, it'll work. If it's another tactic, and this might not even be, I've been put in this position within the therapeutic context where it's not immediately obvious what the person's doing is genuine. You think it's genuine, but it's not immediately obvious
Right.
that it's another manipulation. We're just ticking boxes. So, oh, great, I've gone to therapy so I can say my husband or wife is nuts. I mean, just because someone's showing up to solve a problem doesn't mean they're actually solving the problem, or that's their
100%.
intention to do so. So, I mean, but the bottom line is that as definitely, like I said, like as long as it's in the spirit of finding a solution, the whole way in which this HES game is formulated is actually something a good therapist should be doing already. So if they're getting that with the lawyer or the Toenic, great, that's amazing. Wherever you can find the gem, pick it up and put it in your pocket.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for sharing with us. I think everyone, me, all the listeners, we learned a lot today. And I think it was also there was a certain inspiring thread that went through this conversation, which is that there is still hope. If a person is going to really be willing to play their part, and even if there's no hope for saving the marriage, there's hope for having an amicable divorce.
Yeah.
Because if we can learn the skills of negotiation and keep focused on what's really important to us, by knowing what's really important to us, then we're going to have the quality of life, married or divorced, is going to increase by tenfold, if not more.
If not more.
Okay, thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Thanks for having me. It was really fun talking with you.